Where do you rank a stud running back with a bad matchup versus a backup who has now ascended to a starting role? Well, we're here to answer that question. We're going to walk you through our tiers and rankings for week 4 at the running back position. Kicking this off with the superstar tier, the set it and forget it superstar studs who are balling. You don't even have to think about it. Christian McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, and newly ascended superstar James Cook. Any questions on those 4 guys right now, Tom?
No, I think you go matchup by matchup and you can say, okay, the Jags have been really good against the running back position so far, but Christian McCaffrey's Christian McCaffrey, so you're not going to worry about it. Bijan Robinson, obviously last week, the goose egg against Carolina was unexpected and really stung a lot of people. The Commanders have allowed the fewest fantasy points to a running back position. But again, I'm not going to worry about starting Bijan Robinson. Maybe these are just guys that in DFS I stay away from slightly more. Jonathan Taylor, a player that I feel like this is the 3rd week in a row that we're just eating crow on him. Like his usage is incredible. Again, tough game with him playing against the Rams. But I'm not necessarily worried about it because he's just seeing such elite usage across the board. And then James Cook, if James Cook was ever going to thrive in a matchup, these are the kind of matchups where he thrives because as the game goes on and they are 16.5 point favorites against the Saints, that just screams the Bills are going to run the score up.
Yeah, absolutely. Plenty of garbage time work for James Cook, hopefully. Moving into our A tier, though, Saquon Barkley, Jamar Gibbs, Devon Achane, Josh Jacobs, Jordan Mason, and Derrick Henry. Jordan Mason, Tom, a player you were hyping throughout the entire offseason to anyone who would listen, had, should we say, a better than expected performance last week, buoyed by the touchdowns. Are you expecting him to just continue to produce with Aaron Jones out?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we saw last week, it was just complete volume. He was rested for most of the 4th quarter. He had 76% of the attempts up to that point, 76% of the snaps, ran 64% of the routes, which is fantastic news. That's kind of like a little bit of a hole in his game. He's not a fantastic pass catcher, but if you're going to be out there, get some QB dump offs, then that's what we're hoping for. And he gets to play against the Steelers defense, and the Steelers defense this year absolutely stinks. They've allowed the 2nd highest explosive run rate through 4 weeks, and they're a defense that we're probably going to want to target every single week. So very much going back to the well on Jordan Mason. I think we probably should touch on Saquon Barkley not being on the superstar tier, though. Like, is that somebody that you struggled with, or was it quite an easy decision for you to move him down at this point?
No, I struggle with it. You know, I always think that the Bucks are solid against the run. You know, obviously Vita Vea, I think, is a very useful player there. And I think that at the moment we're just not seeing the targets. We're not seeing that receiving game usage. Obviously, it was Jekyll and Hyde last week, wasn't it? In terms of the first half, the Eagles were absolutely horrendous. The second half, they suddenly started pushing the ball downfield. But, you know, 16% target share, it's not really enough for me to feel really confident to push Saquon Barkley into that elite tier this week.
Yeah, I just think we've kind of seen a bit of regression across the board from Saquon Barkley this year. You know, maybe part of it's usage, maybe it's not. But you contrast his numbers with last year, and he's gone from 5.8 yards per carry down to 3.3. He's gone from 125 yards per game down to 64. Now, obviously, he was breaking off so many explosive runs, which is a big part of it, but his success rate's dropped by 8% as well. So it's just not quite all clicking. He's only got the 2 touchdowns so far, which is a little below the rate which he was at last year. And as you mentioned, Bucks aren't an easy matchup. So there's a lot of these kind of running backs towards the top where I just felt a little bit nervous about him. And then you've got a guy like Jordan Mason in a prime matchup, and it was much easier for me to feel confident about him or even Devon Achane than the guys ahead of them.
Yeah, and also with the Eagles, you know, Lane Johnson obviously had the stinger last week. It sounds like he's going to play, but I need to be confident in that, and I think he's such a huge part of that offensive line that it definitely does take a step back when he does move on. But before we move into our B tier, Tom, if people find us for the first time, hit that subscribe button. Weekly rankings videos, making sure you get those lineups set, nailed, and bringing home that W. The B tier, a nice skinny short one this week. Omarion Hampton, Bucky Irving, Breece Hall, and Kyren Williams. Now, Omarion Hampton had a phenomenal breakout week this week after the Najee Harris injury. Do you think there's an argument that we could potentially have squeezed him into the A tier?
I don't know. I mean, like, he looked bad weeks 1 and 2, so I think being slightly cautious with it is probably still worth it. Yes, 24.9 PPR points, 125 yards, touchdown, and he was actually involved in the passing game more than he's been. So that is good to see. That's definitely something which we hadn't really seen so far. The Giants defense, when it comes to the running back position, they are not a good defense. They've allowed the 4th most points to running back position so far. They allow a league high 2.94 yards after contact per attempt. So there are lots of ways that you can get at the Giants, and maybe he has a blow-up match this week, and then next week we've got him firmly in the A tier. But I think it's right to say we're not quite sure whether he's really, really good or whether last week was just an excellent performance just yet.
Yeah, the thing that I'm really fascinated to look at this week is, so he ran 32 routes last week, which is over 60%. Is that just because Najee went down and they kind of went with who was active in terms of those and rode the hot hand slightly because he did play well? So are they going to come into this week with, Kamani Vidal potentially seeing some of that receiving game usage? Maybe Hassan Haskins gets in, who's a decent pass protector. That is the number I'm going to be watching this week, certainly, is what is Omarion Hampton's route participation percentage, because I think that's going to really impact his fantasy production moving forward.
Yeah, he had a 15% target share last week, and JJ Zacharyson pointed out on Twitter that last year the Chargers only hit that with a running back on 4 occasions. So it's definitely not been something that they've consistently done in the past. Now, if he can do that a few weeks in a row, then we'll be able to start relying on it and understand that this offense has evolved.
Yeah, and then one player I just want to touch on as well, Kyren Williams. You were hyping up in your Wader video Blake Corum, who has been earning more and more share of this offense. Do we think that there's potentially like almost a sell high on Kyren Williams if you've got him in redraft now, with Blake Corum starting to earn more of this backfield?
I think that if you're holding Kyren Williams, you're probably a fan at this point, because there's a lot of us and there's a lot of negativity around there. Blake Corum's averaging over 7 yards per carry per PFF. He's gained a first down on 57% of his runs. That's much higher than Kyren Williams is doing. So, and Kyren Williams' running back rush share rates, they've declined for 3 straight weeks. They went from 94.7% in week 1, 77% in week 2, and 71% last week. He hasn't had a double-digit percentage target share yet this season. Like, the things that keep you up there when you're inefficient is volume and receiving work, and he's losing volume and he's not getting the receiving work. So if it doesn't work out with Kyren Williams, the warning signs were definitely there. I think that you can look at this Colts defense and say perhaps they aren't an incredible unit, but I think that Lou Anarumo, former Bengals coach, is doing a good job there. They've been pretty stout in a number of areas, but then you can put up points on them. They do allow the 3rd highest explosive run rate. So are we going to see Kyren Williams go out there and actually break a long run for the first time in a while? Or is it going to be Blake Corum, who has broken some reasonably decent-sized runs? I mean, if I had to put a bet on it, I'd rather take the odds on Blake Corum.
Yeah, it's amazing how many of these backfields, I think you had the same conversation in Seattle, where you've got a running back like Kyren Williams, like Shaq Charbonnet, who isn't horrendous, doesn't have the breakaway potential, but kind of gets you, 3-4 yards a carry, just gets you what you want and keeps the downs ticking over. Or you've got the home run threat like a Blake Corum, like Kenneth Walker, who he's going to have some more negative runs because they're searching for that home run, but has that home run explosive potential. And what do you want? Do you want to try and stay on pace with the down and distance, or do you want the explosive plays? And I'm fascinated to see how this backfield, how Seattle plays out over the next couple of weeks. Talking of Seattle, though, we do have Kenneth Walker in this next tier. We're obviously not going to be touching on him because they're playing in the Thursday night game. We're recording this before the game, so if you're watching this after, you'll know what's happened. we don't right now. But in the C tier, Chuba Hubbard, Elshon Jeanty, Kenneth Walker, Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne Jr., J.K. Dobbins, Trey Benson, Jaylen Warren. Now, Tom, you are a huge Jaylen Warren fanboy. Always have, always will be. He has got so much more volume in this backfield than I think anybody projected in the offseason. Is it just a case of he is a rock-solid RB2 rest of the way, or are you nervous that there could be someone coming for some of this work?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's really noticeable that he had an 80% snap share last week. That was a career high for him. He said career highs in 2 consecutive weeks now. And that's great. Like, we love to see that, and we love to see the usage in the passing game. Like, he's on track to completely obliterate some of his receiving work that he's had in the past. And Aaron Rodgers seems to really want to involve him there. 9 receptions over the last 2 weeks, 120 yards. But I do worry slightly that Jaylen Warren is not quite efficient enough in the running game to really sustain a bell cow role. I mean, he's averaging 3.1 yards per carry so far through this season, which isn't good. Now, whether that rests on him or whether it rests on the offensive line, play calling, it's hard to say. We're still seeing Kenneth Gainwell mixing in. Now, last week, Gainwell went down to only 14 snaps compared to Warren's 43. So obviously this was massively in favor of Jaylen Warren. But I think that there will be a point where Caleb Johnson gets another shot at this. But until then, I mean, Ian Hartitz pointed this out on Twitter the other day that only 2 running backs lead their team in rushing and receiving yards so far, and it's Bijan Robinson and Jaylen Warren. Like, that's the level of work we're getting.
Pretty useful company. And the other player I want to touch on in this tier, J.K. Dobbins. I've been bemoaning the fact this was a 3-headed backfield to start the season. Well, last week it wasn't. Tyler Bade got cast aside. J.K. Dobbins, insane volumes, 67% of snaps, 54% route participation rate, and 84% running back rush share. Do you think that J.K. Dobbins is that rock-solid RB2 over the coming weeks until we see the emergence of RJ Harvey?
I think so, and I think that there'll be games where it flips slightly. There'll be odd scripts where Sean Payton wants to get RJ Harvey more involved. I think that this week against the Bengals, they're both startable. The Bengals will have second most fantasy points to the running back position. We've already talked about what Jordan Mason did to them last week. The Bengals just can't do anything particularly. So it'll be very much a game where I'm curious to see if they look to get RJ Harvey more involved early to see if he can take advantage against a weak defense. But I would definitely start J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move into the D tier, if you do have any start sit questions, trade questions, whatever you want answered, get them in the comments down below. Tom and I and Tyler will be answering 100% of your questions all the way up to kickoff. Moving into the D tier, a surprising name to kick it off, Alvin Kamara, followed by Cam Scadabo, Quinton Judkins, Chase Brown, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, and Trevion Henderson. Let's start with Alvin Kamara. Tom, the receiving work is just not there. It's been the lifeblood of Alvin Kamara, the previous fantasy superstar. Without that, is that the reason why you just feel you can't start him this week?
Yeah, I mean, look, we need Alvin Kamara to get a lot of volume in the receiving game to be fantasy viable. Like, through 3 games, he has 9 receptions, and it's not like they're even coming on errant targets. He has 10 targets. Like, that is not going to be enough to get it done. You're talking, 50, 60 targets in a season. This is a player who's hovered between 100, 105, sort of down to like 85, 90 targets most often. Alvin Kamara needs more than that. And when he is getting the ball, the way he's getting the ball isn't as useful as it's been in previous years. Like, he's averaging 5.2 yards per reception. So the situations when maybe he's not breaking as many long runs, but either way, it's not happening in the receiving game. And we know that he's at a point in his career, 9 years in, where he's not going to be the most efficient running back, particularly behind that offensive line. I think it makes all the sense in the world for the Saints to look at trading him away to an actual contender. Now they're 0-3, most likely heading to 0-4 this weekend after the Buffalo Bills, who are 16.5 point favorites, probably put them away quite easily. I mean, teams have had success running against the Bills, but how long the Saints going to stick with that? I'm not sure you can have much confidence in saying they will.
Yeah, I mean, are we really surprised this is an age 30 running back? This is career low in yards per attempt, career low in receptions per game, career low in ADOT, yards per target, career low in rushing success rate. Like it's just not getting it done. And yes, a lot of that is this Saints offense is bad, but Alvin Kamara has hit that age cliff and is starting to disappear. So yeah, I think I've said a few times this offseason, he's got an incredibly tradable contract. I think he's going to get traded, which means, Kendre Miller, Devin Neal probably need to be owned in every single redraft league. But from a week to week perspective, he's at best an RB2, if not a flex play. But Tom, I'm going to open it up. Anyone else in this D tier that you feel you want to touch on? There's a few intriguing names, I think.
Well, let's go with Cam Scatterbo, because among 63 qualifying running backs per fantasy points data, he's third in missed tackles forced per attempt, fifth in yards after contact per attempt. Been really impressive. Now, of course, the Chargers are not an easy matchup this week, but I think that he's going to see such volume with Tyron Tracy out potentially for the next few weeks that he's really going to be able to establish himself. The Chargers have allowed 4th fewest running back fantasy points, but I do think that Scatterbo is a flex consideration play this week. I think we've probably got to talk about how Chase Brown has been relegated down to the D tier. When I was putting these together, it was like, wait, Chase Brown, surely we should have him higher than this. And then you go, okay, well, actually, last week he scored 6 PPR points against the Vikings and he had a 19% target share, according to JJ Zacharyson. That's just like, you had 19% target share and turned it into 6 PPR points. Like, if you're playing in half PPR, that's even more miserable. And the Broncos defense this week is a decent defense. They've allowed the 10th most fantasy points to the running back position, but I just don't think we're going to see that from Chase Brown, because I don't think he's able to get anything going with this offense the way it is and the Bengals the way they are this year.
Yeah, and I'm on former Ohio State running back watch this week. I think Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, I'm hoping, expecting it's going to be big breakout weeks for both of those. Quinshon Judkins saw career highs, obviously only 2 games in pretty much every metric last week, and I'm expecting him to take even more work this week. And obviously Travion Henderson, feels like every player on the Patriots fumbled last week, and surely we've got to see more Travion Henderson work this week.
Yeah, very much so. Henderson's the one I've got a little more confidence in this week. It was just notable that I think I can't remember who it was. I think it was TJ Watt said that Mike Tomlin had made a point about how Ramondre Stevenson fumbled a lot, put a lot of videos together in the week up to it, as well as Antonio Gibson. And it's like, if you have running backs who are that unreliable that teams are game planning ready to punch the ball out, and you've got Ramondre Stevenson who's now fumbled 9 times in his last 18 games, like, this is not the recipe for a lead running back. 16 career fumbles for Ramondre Stevenson. Travion Henderson is taking that job whether Ramondre likes it or not. It's just how much the coaching staff are ready to kind of lean into him. The Panthers, they've been fairly good against the run so far, but I don't have any real worries about starting Travion Henderson as a flex, or in a deeper league starting him as perhaps my 4th running back.
Yeah, and if you need a dart throw, whether it be DFS or you're an underdog in a matchup, Travion Henderson's the kind of dart throw that could absolutely win you a week. Moving into E tier, we'll touch on this very briefly. Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt, David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, Nick Chubb, RJ Harvey, Bayshore Tootin, and Kareem Hunt. Tom, I feel like we should probably briefly touch on David Montgomery. Obviously, incredible week last week. Had that crazy long run against your Ravens. David Montgomery is currently the running back 5 in fantasy points on the season, and yet we have got him all the way down here in the E tier. Are we just crazy?
Well, no, because the Browns are that good, and maybe the Lions at home can keep the magic going against this Cleveland defense. But like, look, where Montgomery made hay last week was the fact the Ravens decided that they weren't going to block the interior line. Like, why bother? Why worry about that? Surely they'll just bounce outside. And instead, the Lions just pounded up the gut. The Ravens defense is atrocious. If Zachary Orr makes it through to the end of this season, then I have to assume the Ravens win a Super Bowl, because otherwise the way he's sorting that defense out is just atrocious. So yes, I mean, I like David Montgomery, but I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a great week for him here. I'll just quickly mention Jacory Krosky-Merritt didn't practice on Wednesday. It's unclear exactly why that is, but if he didn't go, then Chris Rodriguez, you should be picking him up right now just in case, because Chris Rodriguez would get the bulk of the work there.
Yeah, and just on the David Montgomery point, last year, previous years, he's been able to get home for fantasy because this has been a 55-45 split. He's had plenty of work. He's been below 40% every single game this year in terms of snaps. Yes, okay, the production was phenomenal last week, but he had 34% backfield share, 14% targets per run, which worked out a 3% target share. Like, yes, the fantasy points are there, but the underlying metrics aren't. And I think that he is probably the biggest sell high candidate in all of fantasy football right now. Rounding it off with our F tier, we have got Chris Rodriguez Jr., Ramondre Stevenson, Waddy Marks, Rashad White, Braylon Allen, Kenneth Gainwell, Zach Charbonnet, and Tyler Algier. I want to briefly touch on Waddy Marks, Tom. I've shouted him out in my last 2 Dynasty Buyers videos. I really feel like he is taking over this backfield. Look, Nick Chubb has had a phenomenal career. He's been a phenomenal player for fantasy, but he's not got much left in the tank. Woody Marks, 47% of snaps last week, 44% of routes, and a 40% backfield share. This feels like the coming out week for Woody Marks.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Titans allow the third most fantasy points of a running back position. So we've seen him get more involved. The Texans need a bit more juice to take off some of the pressure off CJ Stroud. So this could be a really good week to play him.
Yeah, go add him off your waiver wire if he's sat there in your Redraft league. Remember, if you've got any flex questions or trade questions, get them in the comments below. We answer 100% of questions all the way up to kickoff. And make sure you check out these other positional rankings videos.